services response to that. So with that, I will turn it over to Haim.
Thank you, Michelle. This presentation is part of HSC's Disaster Readiness and Resiliency Initiative. There are many activities that we do in partnership with government and nonprofit partners and funded in part by the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. The goal is to ensure both that organizations can help those who need them and that they can continue to fulfill normal functions. So HSC helps prepare organizations for emergencies. And we do that in a number of ways, some of which we'll talk about today. We have an HS Alert emergency communication system. We provide training like this one on how organizations can create effective and practical emergency plans. We've created and we maintain a template for emergency plans. We conduct ongoing research on the sector's readiness. And of course, we continue relationships with government, nonprofit, and other partners. This training was designed as a two-part workshop, one scheduled for April 7th and one for April 20th. But as you know, the COVID-19 crisis requires us to avoid group meetings like that. So we've recreated the workshop to make use of internet capability. There'll still be two group sessions today, April 7th, and on April 20th, but there'll be webinars. They'll also be shorter than originally designed. So they'll be supplemented by self-study webinars that you can view on your own. And you should have received information on the first one of those to view before this session. And I want to emphasize that this is not a training about COVID-19. It's a training that will help you write an emergency plan for your organization. And that plan is intended to prepare you for whatever crisis might arise. For specific information on COVID-19, go to the HSC website. You can use this URL or just go to humanservicescouncil.org. So I hope you've watched the first self-study webinar. It provides an important introduction to this session. If you have not, you will still get benefit today. There will be two further self-study webinars for you to view before our next group webinar on April 20th. And then after that session, a final self-study webinar will close out the training. Again, the self-study webinars for you to view on your own are an important and necessary part of this training. They're not just supplemental. They provide information that you really need to have in order to get results. So I'm Haim Obadia, and I'm the presenter for this webinar. And the technology and logistics are being handled by, as you know, we're still dealing with the novelty of the technology. So Jason Wu and Jennifer Diamond are managing the technology and logistics, except for the mistakes in moving slides, and that's my responsibility. So during the course of the presentation, there will be opportunities for you to ask questions, whether it's about something I just covered or about something that we've already gone past or something that hasn't even come up yet. To do that, we'll be using the chat function. So somewhere on your GoToMeeting screen, there should be an icon that looks like this. At the top or the side. And if you click that, you should see a frame that appears on the right side of your screen. It may already be there. And at the bottom of that, is a space in which you can write. You can write in any of your questions there at any point. We'll be looking at the chat, and at points in the discussion, we'll reply to the questions that have come up. So, first check that your questions are going to everyone in the chat. And in the box above that, you type in your question. And you can see your comment appear in the screen, on the screen above. And you'll also see the questions that other people have typed in. So we'll be looking at the questions that come in on chat. I'll do my best to answer them. And you can type in your questions at any time. So we have a number of objectives today. First, we want to go over the concepts you learned in the self-study webinar. We want to understand the process for producing a written emergency plan. We want to actually get started on our planning. We want to understand the template that's available for download and know the parts of it. And finally, we want to actually start producing your own emergency plan for your organization. So in the self-study webinar, we asked you to complete before today's session. We learned how to use a number of important terms, and let's review those briefly. We learned that an emergency can be big or small, but it threatens life, health, property, and it requires immediate action. Okay, so those are the two determining factors. It's a threat and it requires immediate action. A disaster is an emergency that's become large enough to impact the entire community. And that means people will have needs. And you see that that's actually part of how we're defining it. These terms, of course, are designed for use in emergency planning, and they're not necessarily universal in every circumstance. A hazard is any kind of threat to the community. And hazards have different likelihoods. So risk is the word that we use to talk about the probability of any specific hazard actually happening. Now, while we cannot control what kinds of hazards there are or how likely a hazard is to occur, we do have some control over how vulnerable our community is. That is, some control over how susceptible our community is to damage. So in planning for emergencies, we encourage you to focus not on particular hazards, but on the impact that hazards can have, meaning the consequences, what a hazard actually does to the community. Or in shorter words, simply when we talk about impact, we're talking about the problems that you're going to have to deal with. There are many kinds of ways in which a given hazard will impact the community. These are just a few of them. We've looked at them before. Some of these you may have experienced in previous emergencies. Some of them you're familiar with from the current COVID-19 crisis. So let's just make sure that everyone is clear on these terms. If you have any questions about what these terms mean, please put that into the chat frame and we'll try to answer them I'll give you a minute if you do have questions to get those into the chat. So at the end of the self-study webinar, I asked you to create a chart like this one. And if you have it with you, take it out, take a look at it. This is just a start of your planning, but it's an important start. So look at it and about it. Would it have any changes now if you did this over again? I think that's something many organizations learned from the COVID-19 crisis, is that services can be impacted in many kinds of ways, and some of them are unpredictable. So the response to those impacts needs to be flexible enough to adjust to unforeseen circumstances. But I want to emphasize that that doesn't make planning ahead any less important. On the contrary, by planning ahead, you're preparing for the unexpected. You will have considered a wide variety of things that can happen and a wide variety of ways in which to deal with them. And that will indeed help you when the unexpected happens. So what can you do? Having looked at the impact of hazards on the organization, the potential impact, we naturally ask ourselves, well, what can we do? What can we do to get ready for the next hazard that might affect us? The next hazard will probably not be a pandemic like this one. That's why it's critical to take what we call an all hazards approach to planning. The biggest mistake that people make in planning is to plan for the last disaster. So these are our recommendations for what you can do to help your organization prepare. And we'll go through each of them. You can write an emergency plan, and that's going to be a focus of what we talk about today. You can sign up for emergency notifications, attend trainings, share readiness info with staff and clients, and reach out in your community. Writing an emergency plan is going to be the key focus of what we do today and in the rest of our sessions. It's at the top of our list, so we'll be coming back to talk about this quite a bit. Some of you are probably receiving regular updates on COVID-19 through one or more emergency notification systems. These provide important disaster-related information at all times, whether it's in the midst of an active crisis, such as this one, or more common emergencies that happen. So don't assume that it's redundant to sign up with more than one system. HS Alert, for example, focuses on information for organizational decision-making, including things like contract issues, funding, etc. How Alert is intended for faith-based organizations as well as congregations. Advanced Warning System is targeted by the city to organizations serving people with disabilities and others with access and functional needs. And then Notify NYC, which is a broad-based system for emergencies in New York City. We'll be following up with an email, and among other things, it will provide links to sign up for these different systems. So going back to our list, participating in this training is something you're doing for yourself, but also for your organization, your clients, and your staff. And it's focused on one specific topic, writing an emergency plan. There's a great deal of benefit in other disaster-related trainings, though, and we'll be sending information on other opportunities. Today, the work is on helping your organization prepare, but that includes helping your staff and clients to prepare. A client who is well prepared will be less reliant on you. If a client has a plan and knows in an emergency when they're separated from their families that there is a place that their whole family knows is the place for them to meet after an emergency, they will be in a better situation and less likely to be calling on you to help them meet that need, which they really can do themselves. A staff person who's well prepared will be in a better position to support the organization, right? So there's plenty of good preparedness info for individuals and households. Again, we will send you some links to information that's available from FEMA, from New York City Emergency Management, and from nonprofit organizations. And then finally, reach out in your community, both in the sense of your local neighborhood and in the broader sense of other organizations that may be serving similar populations. Many neighborhoods have emergency response coalitions. Talk to other providers, talk to your precinct and firehouse. The more you know about resources in the neighborhood and about how others are planning, the better position you'll be in to plan effectively for disaster and to cope effectively after disaster. So we'll go back now to the first item in our focus today. And the idea of writing a plan probably raises a lot of questions for you. What is a plan? Can we use a generic plan? Can somebody do it for us? And I hope by the end of today's session, you'll have answers to all of those. But the last one is the easiest to answer. No one can do it for you. A consultant can come in and help you manage the project, help you with grammar and vocabulary, even help you go through the process. But process there must be, because no consultant knows about your organization what is necessary for an emergency plan. Your organization is unique, and you and your colleagues are the ones who have unique knowledge of your organization. So given that you and your fellow staff are the ones who need to write the plan for your organization, what do you need to do? Well, the first thing you need to do is to convene a planning team. Do not expect that any one person can do this alone. One reason being that no one has all the detailed information on every aspect of the organization. So you'll also be gathering information from a variety of sources, and that will continue, that step will continue as the other steps proceed. Drafting the plan is usually the most time-consuming part of the process. And then it needs to be reviewed, revised, finalized. This also includes routing it for management approval as appropriate. And when it's been approved, it's important that you not only distribute the plan throughout the organization, but that you educate staff. It's critical that every staff person understand the plan and understand their role in it. So you need a diverse team. And diverse not only in demographics, but also in experience, in areas of expertise, in organizational hierarchy. Be sure to include staff at multiple levels of the organization. Line supervisors, for example, often have important input about how things really work. And again, you'll be getting all of these slides. So if you miss a particular thing and taking notes, not to worry. So in the email you received, there was a link to worksheets, and I'd like to turn now to worksheet B. The task here is straightforward. Start making a list of the people in your organization who you think should be on the team to write an emergency plan. And yes, I know you can't be sure about any of this, but that's okay. Nobody's going to be checking your work. The point is to come up with the names. And in fact, if there are multiple people from your organization who are participating today, since we don't have the opportunity to break into separate groups, and I'm assuming you're not all in one place, that you're all working remotely, you'll in fact likely to end up with different names. And that's great, because when you do get together, and you should, when you do get together after this, you'll be able to talk through what names are in which list and what the reasons were. So I'd like you to start filling out this form now. And I'm going to give you 10 minutes. Please, I'll ask you during this 10 minutes to focus on the form. If you finish within the 10 minutes, that's great. But please don't think that this is just a 10-minute break. It's 10 minutes to work on worksheet B, and we'll start that now. If you have any questions on the sheet, please do put them into the chat, and we'll try to respond. So we had one question. I had suggested that you diversify the levels of organization, and someone had asked what specifically I meant by that. And I do mean that people are at different hierarchical levels of the organization. It's good to have people who are managers, good to have people who are supervisors, good to have people who are line staff. And I want to, and in addition to that, people have different personal qualities that can impact how they work as a team, so as part of a team. So that's an important thing to take into consideration as well. We've had about 5 minutes, so we'll take 5 more minutes to complete this assignment. We had a very good question about including board members. And that's probably particularly important for small organizations. And really, it's a function of how involved your board is. In small organizations, board members are frequently very much engaged in the work of the organization. And so they do have a really good perspective on what's going on and what kind of things can happen in the provision of services. So including those people is an excellent idea. For larger organizations, it will very much depend on your individual situation. In some cases, there are board members who are very much engaged, and sometimes you may have a board that's rather hands-off in how it functions. And those boards are more likely to be interested in seeing a final product and having the opportunity to comment on the final draft of your plan. Right, yes. Yeah, I should have clarified that. In fact, I did not intend that this only be used for 4 names. This was really just to get you started. And you are likely to have more than 4 people, in fact, and consider also that not everyone needs to be on the team for the entire duration. There are some people whose expertise you really need at some point and whose input you really need, but they're not necessarily have helpful feedback and input for other parts of the process. So think of this as flexible enough for people to come in and people to go out as appropriate. And of course, when I talk about personal qualities as one of the factors you want to consider in choosing your team, I'm referring specifically to personal qualities that are relevant to being a team member. You know that some people are just really good at reaching consensus. Some people are really good at bringing two conflicting parties together and helping them see what they have in common. Some people are just excellent writers. So they bring to the team the ability to get everyone's notes and thoughts on paper and kind of put that together into a coherent document. So there are lots of things that people bring in that's not related to their job title or their position in the hierarchy, but are just part of skills and talents that make them a really helpful member of the team. One of the things that we've noticed in the past few years is that more and more emergency planning for larger organizations is becoming institutionalized. And by that, I mean it's being made part of someone's job description. It's being included in some way in the organizational structure. So someone asked about the risk management team, and that's certainly an appropriate kind of place for this project to reside. In that kind of case, the risk management team would probably be critical players, but you would also want to take a look at who else in the organization should be brought in for this particular project, because you will need a great deal of practical information on operations, on how the services are actually provided and who's doing what. So your risk management team may be the core of that, but you may also need to bring in other people. It's also the case that very often there are people who almost naturally need to be in this kind of project. And the people who are usually mentioned are IT, because the information technology management team is going to have very specific concerns in an emergency after a disaster. They also often have specific training around it. And another person is often someone from HR. A lot of what the planning happens around emergencies needs input from Human Resources Department, and also needs to get information into the Human Resources Department. Related to that, IT and HR, but other people as well, program staff, often belong to professional associations. And those professional associations may be really good sources of information for planning and for disaster response. So think about that as well. Okay. So I think we can move on at this point. I hope it's been helpful for you to think through these issues on working with a team. And you should take some credit now, because you have begun your emergency plan.
Hi, this is Jason from HSC. It looks like Haim has dropped off on audio for just a minute. I think he's reconnecting, so please bear with us as he reconnects onto the webinar. Our apologies.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. I don't really know when I dropped off, but so I'm sorry if you had a question that did not get answered. If so, please do put it into the chat again. One thing that I did say that you probably did not hear was how important it is for you to recognize that when you filled out this chart, you began writing your emergency plan. You can go back to your organization, even if it's not physically, with this in hand, and you can say, I have this piece of paper, which is the beginning of our written emergency plan. That's a tremendous accomplishment, and I don't want you to ignore that or downplay it. That's really important, and I wish you the best of luck in continuing it. Our goal is to get you to a final product that's a practical, usable emergency plan for the organization. But you've really made a very, very good start. So people did ask questions, and I encourage you to continue to ask questions. But we'll move on now, and we're going to talk about the template that was made available for writing your emergency plan. If you have that, you may want to refer to it as we talk. And first, of course, you should consider it broadly. Looking at this document, this template, does it look like it would work for you? Does it address your needs? Is it a good fit? And if it doesn't work as it is, are there parts of it that do meet your needs? The plan was designed for particularly mid-sized nonprofit service providers. And that's because our research shows that these are the organizations who are most likely to not have a plan. And I want to acknowledge here the realities that for all nonprofits, but often particularly for mid-sized nonprofits, bringing resources to bear that are necessary for doing this project are not minimal. And I don't want to suggest that your HSC thinks that this is an easy thing to do that's not going to take much effort at all. No, the truth is, yes, it will require effort. So our goal is to provide you with the materials, the training, and the advice necessary for you to get to a final product. So we'll go over each part of the plan briefly, and then we'll focus on one of the most important, but the others will all be covered in the self-study webinars. So these are the parts of the plan: readiness, emergency action, incident leadership, continuity of operations, and maintaining the plan. When we talk about readiness, we've already made a good start. You made a good start with readiness by signing up for the training. This section on readiness in your plan will address the things your organization does and is going to do to be prepared. Now, in many cases, the readiness is the last section of the plan to actually be written, even if it's the first to be presented. Because as you go through the process of writing the plan, you'll learn a lot about what your organization should be doing to be prepared. And those things will go into this readiness section. If you recall, we said that an emergency requires immediate action. And you've probably already thought about emergencies that can happen or have happened to your organization. And these are some examples. In all likelihood, you have a procedure in place to respond to one or more of these. Some of these may be more relevant to some organizations than others. So if you gather those policies together and protocols that you have to deal with, that will go a long ways to developing an emergency action plan. Because the emergency action plan, as we said, it's about emergencies, small or large, and it provides a clear focus in a way that you've thought through and you know is an effective way to respond. And it identifies what the immediate actions are that are necessary. Incident leadership ensures that a plan is in place for the emergency to be managed appropriately. It makes clear who reports to whom, and it ensures that the response to the disaster and the recovery from it have a plan, and that the plan is effective. And your plan for incident leadership, though, needs to be specific to your organization. It needs to be in keeping with the organizational culture, the expectations of stakeholders, precedents, because it needs to work for you. When we provide this template, it's not intended to be something in stone, but rather it's a guide for you to write the emergency plan, which will actually work for you. Continuity of operations will be the bulk of what we talk about in the next group webinar on April 20th. It describes how the organization will restore essential functions. In other words, if for any reason you're not able to provide services, in whole or in part, or your services are drastically altered, the Continuity of Operations Plan, or COOP, will explain what you'll do to get back up and running as soon as possible. And finally, your emergency plan needs to be a living document. No matter how good the plan, it must be kept up to date. Staff need to review it regularly, and the organization needs to practice it. So there's some standard basic best practices in this regard, and those will be discussed when we describe this part of the plan in more detail. So again, we're keeping an eye on the chat section to see if there are questions. So please, on anything that I've just discussed about the parts of the plan, do submit questions. Again, I'll remind you that today's training is about emergency planning with an all hazards approach. This is not a training about COVID-19. There's a great deal of information about that available on the Human Services Council website, and I encourage you to go there, humanservicescouncil.org. So when we approach continuity of operations, we're going to have to understand two critical factors. We call these mission essential functions and primary business functions. And it may be challenging to get a really solid grasp of what these mean, but it can be a very rewarding part of the work. Because it's all about mission, right? That's what we do. We call ourselves mission-driven organizations. So mission essential functions are the functions that really you must perform to achieve your mission. Without them, so to speak, you aren't you. Now, your organization does a great deal of things day in and day out, but some of those are truly at the core of what you do. So we're going to look at mission essential functions, which if you're not doing them, you're not fulfilling your mission. And primary business functions that have to be done just to maintain the survival and viability of the organization as an organization. And when it comes down to it, not everything you do, not every service, not every function must be performed in an emergency. And I'm sure you've seen this in the response to COVID-19. This is a matter of setting priorities. So the COOP plan focuses on the critical things that the organization must continue to do with as little interruption as possible. So when we try to decide what our organization's essential mission functions are, we might ask some questions like these. They can help you make the decision of which are mission essential functions. But it's important to remember that this is just guidance. Asking and answering these questions will help you in your process of making a decision about what are the mission essential functions. But they don't, it's not like you can enter answers and out pops an answer, because really you need to recognize that your organization is unique and your mission is unique. So let's take an example. and invented MHS Inc. provides mental health services. And they define their mission in this way: to help families and individuals identify problems, resolve conflicts, and promote optimal functioning in everyday life. And we're not going to get into a discussion of whether this is a good mission or a well-constructed mission. The point is that we take the mission as a given, and from the mission, we identify mission essential functions. So if you look at this list, think about these are things that the organization might be doing. So give some thought to each of these in order and think about, are they mission essential? Does the organization have to do this for it to feel that it's fulfilling its mission? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to just go through this list and think not only about whether this is or isn't a mission essential function, but why it is. Why this mission implies that this item or another item should or should not be a mission essential function. So we'll take 2 minutes beginning now. So 2 minutes is a really long time, isn't it? I'm going to start with a couple of questions that came in related to the previous topic of the parts of a plan. And to clarify, when we talk about emergency planning and having a written emergency plan, we're talking about a comprehensive document. And as a comprehensive document, it addresses what is relevant to being prepared for an emergency of any kind. So the emergency action plan is a piece of the comprehensive emergency plan, and it's a piece that focuses on those emergencies that may or may not be disasters, but require immediate action. Continuity of operations specifically is about the issue of how do you provide services when you have had to stop, when you've had to cease or drastically cut the services you provide. How do you get those back up and running? So that too, that continuity of operations plan is a piece of the overall emergency plan. And regarding the number of people in the planning team, Again, that's really going to be a matter of your organization. It obviously needs to be small enough that it'll be effective, but large enough that it'll bring in the information that you need. So you might or might not have answered these items here as being mission essential or not. And some people may have come up with this as a decision. They might have identified these items as like family therapy as a mission essential function. They might have decided that Mental Health Week is not a mission essential function. And what I want to make clear is that nobody really has the absolute correct answer. If you made a different decision, that doesn't mean that you don't that you're wrong. It means that you made a different assessment of what the mission is and how relevant this item is to the mission. Now, of course, for yourselves, you're going to be working with your own organization around your own mission. So you'll have a much better grasp of whether the items on your list of functions and things that you do are core to that mission. So with just a little change in this mission, then it would be obvious that Neighborhood Mental Health Week is an essential function, because it is all about mission. So these are some questions that can help you. We said earlier, but none are going to give you the absolute answers. They really just focus on the important things. And your gut is really going to be the best indicator. Because remember that you're the experts. You know your organization better than anyone from outside your organization. And I'd like, this is a good time to make a few more points about mission essential functions, because it is all about setting priorities. And that becomes difficult because it means that after a disaster, certain things will get more attention and more resources than other things. So it's important to make sure that staff understand why the organization has identified the functions it has. You want everyone to be on board. So you need to help people understand why work that they may spend a lot of time on and has great meaning for them and great meaning for clients are not necessarily functions that the organization will restore first. Choosing mission essential functions does not reflect on staff or on the quality of their work. And it's important to repeat that regularly in this process, both for yourselves and for other staff. The prioritization is critical because you do have to make choices. That's part of what a disaster forces on you. So keep that in mind. This is another opportunity to ask questions, and I'll just say again, please put them into the chat either now regarding things we just covered or at any point about any of the topics that we've discussed or that we expect to discuss. So we're approaching the end of our time today, and let's talk about where we go from here. In the links that were sent to you, one is for Worksheet C. I'm going to ask that you fill that out before you watch self-study webinar number 2. And self-study webinar number 2 is not available yet. It will be by the end of this week. And that will follow up on today's session. It'll provide some context on how human organizations not only cope with the impact of disaster on them, but also how organizations cope with the impact on their communities. And it'll go into much more detail than we did today on the emergency action plan section of the template. When you've watched that seminar, you can go on to fill out Worksheet D. And we'll talk about that more in a bit in detail. And then once you've filled out Worksheet D, you can watch webinar number 3, which will be available to you by then. And finally, complete Worksheet E, and then we'll have our next group session on April 20th. Now, it may seem like a lot, and it is substantial, but the overall time for you as a commitment of time is not more than we would have spent working together in a regular 2-session workshop, right? Because we would have had 2 half days, and it would have been 2.5 or 3 hours each of those days. And these sessions are all being presented in a much shorter time frame, and they're split up into short time frames. So you are getting the full benefit of 2 sessions, and it's simply being split up for you. But each section is important and is a piece of the whole. So please do follow through. Please do watch those webinars and do complete the worksheets. It does mean that you need to take responsibility for scheduling the time in your schedule to fit all of this in. So I asked that you fill out Worksheet C. This is this will help you organize your thinking. It will help you take a sense of how prepared you are or are not at this time. And it will also serve as a very good starting place with your colleagues to discuss where you agree and where you don't agree in this, and what that tells you about where you need to move forward in your planning. And in fact, you may want to get together with your colleagues in your organization and go over this together and have a group discussion. Worksheet D has 2 parts. First, when we talked about emergency action, we said that many organizations have protocols or procedures about how to handle emergencies. So simply find out what those are, pull them together, and make a list here of all the ones that you have. And then once you've done that, go on to the next session and give some thought to what it is that you've discovered you don't have. one of the advantages of looking through all of these procedures that you have is to see where there are gaps, where there are things that you have not addressed. So that'll be an important piece of planning for the future, because you want to know what is it that you are and what is it that you're not prepared for. So let's take a final opportunity for questions. First, that's a good one. Let's clarify that on these, when we talked about the things to be done, as soon as right. Okay, so you have worksheet C, you have worksheet D. Once the self-study webinar 3 goes up, we'll then make available worksheet E. So all of this will be available before the next group webinar, but they'll be staggered. So you now have worksheet C and D. You'll very soon, in the next few days, have webinar number 2. And then when you get webinar number 2, you'll have worksheet E. Okay, any questions about that? Great. Now and then what I want to point out is that you will be receiving a survey questionnaire. It'll be a link that you can follow just to answer a very few questions about the experience today. Most of them are a simple clicking on a dot. There are also a few open-ended questions that you can make use of if you prefer. And that's really an important part of us assessing what this, how this redesign has worked for us. I feel like we had just gotten to a place where we were comfortable that our training was well designed and meeting people's needs, and people were considering it valuable. And then we were upended by this need to redesign. So we haven't quite gotten all of the kinks out of it, and your input will be very valuable. So please do fill out the questionnaire. And if you if you go to the, have any other input that you want to share with us at any time, you can email info@humanservices.org.
Haim, sorry, that's actually info@humanservicescouncil.org.
Oh, thank you, Jason. Yes, humanservicescouncil.org. Which of course is also the place where you can get information or input on COVID-19 if you have particular questions. But do first check, if you're writing about COVID-19, do first check the materials that are on the website. And you may also be interested in participating in the regular HSC COVID-19 update conference calls, and information on that is also available on the website. So thanks very much for participating today. Be on the lookout for that next email telling you how to access the next webinar. And I look forward to getting together with you again on April 20th. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Haim. So just as a reminder for everybody, I posted a couple of links up on the chat, both to our evaluation and also to the information on our website. I will send out all of these materials again in an email after this webinar. But if you are not on the mailing list because you did not register for the webinar in the before, please feel free to send me an email at info@humanservicescouncil.org, and I'll be sure to add you to the list so that you will receive all of this information.